What I want to do today is to kind of set a little bit of context for the event. I think DevOps is exciting, but what's more exciting for me is the fact that DevOps is kind of the embodiment of some stuff that's really changing in the world. I spend a lot of time talking to organisations about what the future looks like for organisations, for the world, for society. And I believe that the future looks very different from what today looks like. And DevOps is kind of an articulation of that. A little bit of an introduction about who I am and what I do. My name is Kepes, as Nati said. I'm a cloud computing blogger, commentator, analyst. Cover a broad range of areas: infrastructure, applications, platform, DevOps, the whole shebang. I do a lot of different things. I work with organisations, customer organisations who want to know how cloud is applicable for them, how it can help them achieve their outcomes. Do a lot of work with vendors, both large vendors looking to move to the cloud, but also startups. Do a lot of advisory work. I'm involved in probably 8 or 10 different companies, different startups as a investor. A lot of advisory boards, so a bunch of different things. But underlying all of that is this thesis that the world is changing. And I hope I'm right about that, because the world needs to change, I believe. So I want to set the scene a little bit, and I want to kind of talk about a few stereotypes. If you buy into my thesis that the world is changing, then you kind of need to know how the world looks today and what that means for the world of the future. So there's a few stereotypes that we have in any development shop, in any development organisation. And the first stereotype is the business. The business tends to get all the attention because, funnily enough, they have the money. The business is always driven by results. It's about the bottom line. They don't care about the technology. They don't want to know. They walk around in suits and they talk business talk and they talk outcomes, and they just expect all the stuff to just happen. And the most technical they might get is to say when a developer or when an operations team says, we can't do it, they'll just say, oh, but it's just an SQL query, how hard can it be? So that's kind of the level of their technical ability. So that's kind of the first stereotype. They wear suits, they tend to spend a lot of time on BlackBerries, and they talk in business terms. The second stereotype is the developers, and the developers tend to be long-haired, dreadlocked, kind of hippie types, and I have it on good authority, they tend not to wash so much, they tend to be a little bit smelly. Developers tend to be quite idealistic. They'll try new things, but it's always striving for the right outcome, for perfection. Sometimes that idealism maybe gets in the way of actually delivering outcomes. The dogma gets in the way of the pragmatism potentially. And then the third stereotype is operations. And so if developers are long-haired and dreadlocked and smelly, then operations are even worse, because they're locked up in basements somewhere. And they tend to be really, really geeky, and they tend to have very poor personal skills. And this is all generalisations, of course. They tend to be apparently they have a preponderancy to be overweight, and their focus is racking and stacking, speeds and feeds. These are the people that they're kind of not into this whole cloud thing, because cloud doesn't have flashing lights, and if it doesn't have flashing lights and big kick-ass fans and lots of beautifully laid cables, then it can't be real. So that's kind of operations. And what does having these three groups kind of diametrically opposed, what does it actually result in? Well, it kind of results in this. And for anyone who doesn't know, this is Christian Riley, who's a fellow Clouderati and who's actually the principal cloud API architect dude at Bechtel, which is the largest engineering and construction company in the world. But the reason I use this photo is because it kind of makes him look stupid, which everyone likes. But really, frustration. You've got three groups that are talking in completely different languages, that have different drivers, that have different motivations, and none of them are satisfied because they're all at, there's all opposing aims from there. And so something needs to change. We need a revolution. We need to break down those silos because we have these three hugely distinct silos that mean that the bottom line is the business, the organisation, the outcomes aren't achieved. And that's not good for anyone. It's not good for the developers because they don't get paid, they don't get to use the tools they want to use. It's not good for operations because they can't afford to buy exciting new flashing light servers. And it's not good for the business because their bottom line doesn't get driven. So there's a revolution happening, and we need to look at why this revolution is occurring. Fundamentally, the world is changing. It's always risky to say the world is changing because in every generation there's always someone that stands up and says the world is changing, and normally back in the 60s, the hippies that said that were the ones that grew their hair long, went and lived in the country on farms, kind of like I do in New Zealand, maybe, and opted out, and society kind of moved on, and they just stayed there and looked kind of sad. But at the risk of looking sad and looking like a bit of a hippie, albeit a hippie with short hair, I do believe that the world is changing, and there's a few different things that are fueling the changes that are occurring. The first is a need for speed. Remember in the old days when R&D occurred on a snail's pace, when rolling out changes, when you created a product, the need to iterate, the need to create the second generation was kind of a multi-year project that we could go slowly and we could do R&D and we could test. That doesn't happen anymore. Agility needs to happen today, right here, right now. And so there's demand from organisations that the people within the organisation are able to deliver upon that agility. Fundamentally, why did the cloud happen? The cloud happened for a bunch of different reasons. One of the reasons was that it simply isn't acceptable for a team to put in a requisition order for servers and to wait 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks for someone to physically bring in the servers, stack them, cable them up, put them in place. That doesn't work, and it can't work. We need agility. If I need a server today, I want to be able to spin that up. If I all of a sudden create an application that goes crazy, goes viral, I want to be able to handle that load. And so there's a modern need for speed and for agility. I tend to illustrate things with a few quotes here. We all know Etsy. So here's another example relating it to development and to DevOps. It's about the fast and frequent feedback, the ability to iterate, the ability to turn on a dime, to fail fast and fail cheap. There's another driver, which is money. Money has always been a driver, but more so today under the constraints that organisations have. And money kind of occurs in a couple of different ways. There's some real constraints around capital expenditure. Anyone here from a large organisation that has recently put in a requisition order for a kick-ass Oracle Exalogic cloud in a box will know that it's kind of hard to get capital expenditure, and so there's this real constraint, there's this real bottleneck around money, and obviously, we're coming out of the GFC, but clearly the GFC changed the world because all of a sudden, people that believed that there was this ongoing tap of money that could just be left on all the time got a rude awakening and realised that wasn't the case, and that things actually need to stack up, and that there needs to actually be a fundamentally viable financial bottom line to projects. Again, another quote here, this one from Mark from GitHub, and it's a really interesting concept, this concept that code that you've written is actually inventory. You've invested in that, and it's no different from me being, one of the things I do, I own a manufacturing business. We make backpacks and outdoor clothing. It's no different from us making a bunch of product, sitting it in a warehouse somewhere and not being able to sell it. Code that's been written and not deployed is dead money. A, it's totally unsatisfying for those that have written it, but B, it's potentially being able to to generate a gain for the organisation, but it can't because it hasn't been deployed. Another driver, the demand for mobility. My friend Christian Riley, who we all saw before, one of the things he talks about is the fact that at Bechtel, where they've got literally thousands of different applications running on crazy old-fashioned hardware, they don't actually want to move those applications to the cloud. What they want to do is they want to expose the data within the applications in a mobile manner. And so there's this driver for mobility, and developers all of a sudden need to start thinking about, maybe they don't need to think about mobile first, maybe they need to think about a joint mobile plus desktop strategy, but there's a driver for mobility, and DevOps has a part to play in that as well. Generational changes. We all know, we've all heard, and we're all probably sick to death about Generation Y and how the world's going to change when Generation Y comes into the workplace. I don't believe the world's completely going to change just because Generation Y, because it may come as a surprise to Generation Y, but when they have a job, they're actually going to have a boss, and the boss is going to tell them what to do, and they'll have to do it. But the fact is that people are used to using tools that are lightweight and that are flexible and do what they want to do. And it simply isn't tenable that we can sit at home and use Facebook and YouTube and Gmail and whatever, and then go into the workplace and use these horrible, complex, slow, clunky tools that actually don't do what we want them to do. And then when we want to actually scale those tools, we can't, because we need to wait on an operations team, and we need to think about developers that haven't written applications to scale. So all of these things are a revolution, and so every organisation, from tech to manufacturing to hospitality to automotive, everyone needs to think about what it means for them. There's not an organisation out there that hasn't got some problem that can be solved through development, and there isn't an organisation out there who doesn't have a development problem that needs to think in a flexible way and needs to put DevOps into their formula for the way they think about the future. Another quote here. It's about the automation. The fact is that even if the money was there to be able to go and buy servers and rack and stack them and cable them up, the fact that it takes a physical person to do that, it's the fact that someone actually needs to provision them isn't tenable anymore. So there's this automation that needs to occur, and clearly DevOps is all about that automation and embodying it. And so we're seeing a real democratization. I wrote a post a couple of months ago specifically talking about Force.com, Salesforce's platform as a service. I spend a lot of time talking about platform as a service because I believe it is actually the future of cloud computing. But what we're seeing with Force.com and other highly declarative platforms as a service is the sort of uber democratization of computing. We all know what happened when we went from one computer per organization with strange people wearing white lab coats running it, and we had to put in a requisition to use it, when we went from that to all of a sudden a computer being on every desk. All of a sudden there was this democratization where we could actually achieve the outcomes we wanted. And so we're seeing that same democratization occur within the development framework and the development cycle. The problem with that is that there's a requirement there for two things which are kind of diametrically opposed. We want robustness. We want to know that with this democratization comes the fact that these applications that I create can scale, and I don't need to think about it. I may be a business user that creates an application on a declarative platform. I'm not technologically savvy, so I don't even know the questions I need to ask, but I just expect that will scale up to meet my needs. And so we have this demand for robustness, but on the other side, we've also got this demand for simplicity. The fact that I am a business user using a highly declarative, democratized platform means that by definition I don't have the ability or the desire to actually wrangle that platform. So what I need is the simplicity for that to happen for me. And so these things are kind of at odds. We want highly robust in an ever-changing, increasingly complex world, but we also want simplicity. And this is where the whole DevOps, automation, crossing the bridge, spanning the chasm, whatever metaphor we want to use, between developers and operations with the business drivers there really comes into play and where it's really important. I guess everyone here would have heard of Adrian Cockcroft, who's the poster boy for, he's definitely the poster boy for Amazon Web Services, but he's one of the poster boy practitioners for DevOps and the cloud generally. He's the chief architect, cloud architect at Netflix. And there's been a lot of stuff written recently about this sort of concept of anti-fragility, where you test things and you break things in a sort of a micro-controlled way over and over and over and over again, so that over time the solutions get more and more robust. Everyone here has probably heard of the Chaos Monkey. Chaos Monkey is something that Netflix created to test their own systems, and basically the Chaos Monkey is this crazy little beast that runs around stress testing everything and trying to break as much as possible, and by doing so causes the odd little error, or lots of little errors here and there, but over time, with this whole idea of incremental improvement, the systems are improved and things become more robust. There's a term that's sort of come into parlance recently, which is continuous IT improvement, or CITI. And the idea of that is that in the old days we went from development to QA to deployment, and there was this sort of really siloed mentality. Well, there's this idea now that we can continuously improve, that applications are a conglomerate of hundreds and hundreds of different points, hundreds and hundreds of different functional areas, and that we can't expect in one hit to do QA, to simply test, release, forget. It doesn't work that way anymore. We need this continuous improvement, continuous development process, whereby things can continuously get better, continuously be stress tested, and continuously react to a changing world and changing demand profile. Because if we look at, Netflix is a really good example. If we look at the outages that they have had, and clearly a lot of the Amazon outages they've survived, some of them they haven't. But if we look at the outages they have, every single one's been different. Yes, almost everyone has related to Amazon's East Coast zones, and there's some issues there around some sort of capital expenditure that Amazon needs to make. But they've all had very different root causes. And so again, a system that looks at sort of monolithic QA, develop, QA, deploy, simply isn't going to work, because the world doesn't work like that. There's lots and lots of changes that happen all the time. And so this revolution is happening. It's clearly happening. It's out there. So all we need to know is how does it look, and why is DevOps so important to that? Because DevOps is important, but it's just one thing. We need to look at the macro picture to see why DevOps is so important to that. So as I said before, there's democratization. Formerly, tech was absolutely a monopoly, and so there was a Gartner report that came out 2006 or 7 that suggested that 80% of IT expenditure goes to just keeping the lights on. So 80% of expenditure is just status quo, a little bit of maintenance, power and cooling, all the boring stuff, which leaves 20% to actually do new and exciting things. Of that 20%, a lot of time has to be spent, and a lot of money has to be spent on that monolithic QA process. So all of a sudden, of 20% of a shrinking IT budget, you probably have 20% of that, which can actually go to actually doing good stuff. And so with a continuous improvement model, you don't have these monolithic budgetary constraints either. And so we're having a democracy, we're having a democratization. Technology is now obtainable by all. The DevOps model has allowed the DevOps and the PaaS and the cloud model has allowed outcomes to drive the investment and the expenditure. So we've got power transferred from the few to the many. And where does the responsibility for ensuring that that's secure, reliable and robust lie? You guessed it, it lies with DevOps practitioners. And so if we think about this continuous improvement model, we need to think about the process as a production line. And so you've got a production line that feeds back on itself, and at every point in that, DevOps has a part to play. And so what's the DevOps role? What's the DevOps level of importance? Well, there's motivation. You know, when an organisation can see an application go from conception to code to deployment in a matter of hours/days, it really motivates the organisation to start thinking outside of the squares, outside of the square. So it's delivering and developing agility, but it's also, again, in the cycle of continuous improvement, it's increasing the motivation to be more agile. So it allows the organisation to focus on the outcomes, and over time it motivates them to further focus on the outcomes and further think about greenfields opportunities. As we've seen before, DevOps as a field allows both the development side of the house and the operations side of the house to get over their frustrations. We've all had situations where, as a developer, you sit there writing what you believe is beautiful code and then tear your hair out because operations can't run this application that you've just created, can't scale it, can't keep it up. On the other side, we've all seen operations get super frustrated because developers, in their idealistic way, have written an application that doesn't actually reflect the fundamental requirements of the operational structure of the organisation. And so again, we've got a situation where the two sides of the house speaking two completely different languages, and those operational models simply don't fit. So what we need to do is we need to build some bridges. We need to build some bridges between the business and development and operations and create a holistic way of looking at the world. There's also this idea of being able to try new things. The fact that new and improved products can happen quickly and readily, and obviously DevOps delivers that as well. Most important thing, and the thing that I think we need to reflect on when we look at an organisation like Netflix, is it allows the org to make mistakes. If you ever talk to Adrian Cockcroft about the way Netflix as an organisation works, it's really interesting because everyone is empowered and encouraged to own their own mistakes, but no one is criticised for their mistakes if they own them. And so you move from having this sort of adversarial developers versus operations, kings of our own castle, silos, doing our own stuff, not letting other people into our domain, to all of a sudden this real embracing of mistake making, innovation, and trying new things. And that all of a sudden becomes really enabling because the organisation is actually able to achieve its outcomes and deliver value. There's obviously an issue, and we've reflected on it before, that people don't want to wait in line. In the traditional model of development and operations and deployment, the business will create a needs document. It will then wait in line for development time. Development happens, the development gets created, and then all of a sudden there's this discontinuous and disconnected process because the developers in the business are waiting for operations to get up, requisition hardware, deploy stuff, test it from an operation perspective. And so all of a sudden we're able to stop the issues around queuing and allow operations and deployment to actually happen continuously. So the challenge for today is really to think about what DevOps as practitioners need to do, what they need to do themselves in their day-to-day role, and also what they need to do to enable this change to occur. And so we've got a few things here. It's pretty obvious and it's pretty fundamental, but it's always worth remembering. You need to think about the end user. At the end of the day, applications are written for end users. That may be the business that's using them, it may be the public, it may be customers. But at the end of the day, applications aren't written for developers, applications aren't written for operations. And so, to be honest, the two groups need to kind of get over themselves. And DevOps as a role needs to remember that it's there to ensure one thing, which is that the application gets delivered to whoever is going to be consuming it in a timely manner and it can scale. That's it. So just think about the end user. Just think about the people that actually want to get hold of that application and utilise it. There was an interesting article in Gigaome or SiliconANGLE recently around DevOps. This is just a quote that speaks to that. It's all about thinking about the end user, thinking about the weird use cases that end users have. And it's not about the silo where QA has to find all the bugs and everyone else can kind of hold their hands up and say, oh, that was your job. It's a continuous improvement, and testing and release is part of that continuous cycle, and everyone has a part to play in that. We need to make it repeatable. We're all really guilty, I guess, in technology of creating one-time wonders where an application or a process is created that simply isn't repeatable. That maybe worked in the old days where we had monolithic application stacks and we had one solution for an entire organisation, but that doesn't work anymore. You look at the average organisation today that has a high level of technological affinity or ability or necessity, and it's running literally hundreds and hundreds of different applications. So DevOps needs to be repeatable. We can't have an experience in one situation, have a problem in one situation, and then not apply the solution for that situation to another problem. The interesting thing when we look at Netflix and we look at the tools that they've created and the processes that they use, the interesting thing is that they think about the models, and so when a problem occurs in a particular area of an application for Netflix, they think about that at a macro level. They think about that as a shape, as a pattern. And so think about patterns and try and make those patterns repeatable, because A, that's going to make you as a DevOps practitioner, as a developer, as operations, much more efficient, but B, it's also going to reduce the time to output, because you can apply solutions from problem A to problem B. Another quote here from Matthias. It's not about just simply having a nice script on your own box. That's the nuts and bolts of delivering DevOps, and that's kind of a given. It's about recreating what you do, and yes, scripting is a part of that, but fundamentally it's about culture. We're going to hear today about a bunch of different technologies and a bunch of different ways of delivering automation and delivering DevOps, and sure, those are super important and we should all embrace them. But the key thing is the culture, because no end of automation and scripting in the world is going to help if you have a discontinuous and disconnected process within your organisation that sees communication broken down into silos and not horizontalised across the organisation. And so, think about scripting, think about automation, but think fundamentally about the cultural change that your organisation needs to be able to embrace DevOps. Part of that is thinking like a team. It's a theme that we come back to again and again. The organisation of the past was a series of discontinuous and disconnected silos. The organisation of the future simply cannot be that. The organisation of the future needs to have a bridge across all parts of it. And so everyone needs to think of themselves as a team. Yes, there are going to be people who are specifically development focused. Yes, there will be people that are slightly more operationally focused. But if you all think about each other as solving the problems of the team, that's going to really help in the delivery of robustness. Again, DevOps teams don't run under constraint of individual process profiles. It's about broader responsibilities. It's about everyone thinking about getting those valuable features into the hands of the user and everyone taking their part in that. Us rather than them and their. Bear Grylls, focus on getting things into the wild. It's about production code. Developers are often really guilty of building stuff because they can and trying things and trying new languages and trying new frameworks. But it's not actually about that. While that's fun and that's amazing and that's professional development and that's ultimately potentially useful for the organisation, that doesn't solve the problem. What solves the problem is focusing on getting stuff into production, on building, on using the tools that you have, on building solutions, on getting them out there in the wild, getting them stress tested and continuously improving around that process. Again, stringent focus on code issues and those relating to general site reliability. Need to be really operationally aware. And that's kind of interesting because in the siloed world, obviously, the developer tended to have very little operational awareness, whereas operations were arguably too focused on operations. And so by sort of mixing those two things together, we get to a happier place. Communication is a given. You know, at the end of the day, it's all about having this team, this bridge across the different divisions. We could talk for the rest of the day, to be honest, for the rest of the week, about different systems you can use, about, you know, what form your agile development process looks like, what particular development social solution you use, which vendor you use for your code repositories. None of that stuff, yes, that stuff matters, but none of that stuff matters in the bigger scheme of things because it's a cultural thing. You know, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you have every agile methodology and product under the sun if you don't have the process underlying that, because it's about the process and the culture and the communication that actually allows those tools to actually deliver value. Again, from Nisha Suri, it's about the communication. It's about everyday design and development and coding decisions and making sure that lots and lots of small incremental changes occur to deliver those outcomes. And it's about realising that there's this balance between trouble and change. And I think, you know, Netflix is held up as a poster boy, and I'm kind of, in some ways, I'm loath to use them as an example because everyone uses them as an example. But the fact that they're on the cutting edge and they try new stuff all the time and they try stuff early, and obviously Amazon, you know, tests new things with them, and they embrace the fact that those changes and those new products and those new approaches are going to cause trouble. You know, fundamentally, those are going to break things. But rather than thinking, we need an application, we need to do QA, QA needs to be 100% secure. Once QA happens, we deploy and nothing ever changes ever again, this rigid, monolithic 1.0 view of the world. They instead embrace this situation which says, look, our application is made up of thousands and thousands of different parts. Those parts are involved in a world that is innovating incredibly rapidly and changing all the time. And so we need to embrace the fact that changes happen. And we also need to accept the fact that with those changes, there's a chance for trouble to be caused. And what they do is they look at that and they say, look, yes, bad things happen. Shit happens. This, you know, from time to time, our service will go down. But we have two options. The first option is to take the old approach, which is the fact that we have a monolithic stack. QA happens, code never gets changed. It's going to be completely reliable, but there's going to be no innovation there. We're not going to be able to embrace and take advantage of the changes in the world to make a commercial benefit, to make a commercial outcome. It's the first opportunity. Second opportunity is to say, look, what do our users fundamentally want? Because after all, we're thinking about the customers. What our users want is to be able to, in the most robust way possible, use the best tools, use the tools that and applications that deliver their outcomes in the best way possible. And oftentimes that's going to mean using new stuff that hasn't been tested to the same degree, stuff that hasn't got the reliability. But there's a commercial imperative there because Netflix wins by being innovative, by changing things, and by keeping their competitors on their toes. And so they accept a little bit of trouble to achieve a whole lot of change. And that's what DevOps is all about. It's about accepting the fact that it's through incremental change, through incremental improvements, through sometimes problems that we're going to get a more robust, more stringent, and at the end of the day, problem-solving solution. And that's what DevOps should be looking to deliver. So to wrap it up, the world's changing. The models of the old world, the processes of the old world, the tools and techniques of the old world simply aren't going to cut it anymore. We need to find new ways of working. We need to find new ways of doing things. We need to find new tools and new processes that allow us to take advantage of the incredible technologies and design patterns and societal changes that are occurring. DevOps has a huge role to play in delivering all of that, but with that comes a real responsibility. So if there's one thing to do today, it's to think about this balance between the tools you use and the processes you use so that you can most maximize the outputs that DevOps can deliver. Thank you.